Hello guys, and welcome back to another cold episode. On today's episode, I am going to help you understand how to play around hand traps, as well as how to play hand traps yourself. This is a integral part to the Yu-Gi-Oh! TCG, and yeah, it's pretty important. This is mostly going to be focused around Master Duel and how to understand what hand traps your opponent might have, because in the regular paper TCG, it is much more difficult to exactly know what your opponent might have. It's mostly just knowing what cards are available in the current meta. For example, right now, I think some of the most common cards in the current meta for the Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel are Maxi, Ash Blossom, Imperm, and Effect Veiler, as well as Nibiru's thrown in there every once in a while. But these are some cards to definitely be considerate of. Some other cards that you can always keep in mind are just any of these cards on this list. So let's just quickly hop into a duel so I can show you what I am talking about and why I play the way that I do around specific hand traps. Alright, so here we are in the duel, and as you can see, I have opened Duel and Lockbird. I also opened Nibiru, which is kind of funny. But I have my toggle on. As you can see in the bottom right corner down here, where my face cam normally is, I've actually turned the toggle to on. So what this does is basically it allows me to, at every interval I can activate something, it will give me the opportunity to. Meaning, at this moment, I can activate Duel and Lockbird. It would have normally given me a chance to, but this is really good and helpful if you have something like a Maxi, or maybe a fusion spell or something like that, or just something along those lines that special summons something that you want to activate during the main phase. Like, for example, Branded in Red to go into Despian Queritus. It's just something that I know. You can summon that during the main phase, and then it has an effect that only activates during the main phase. So having your toggle on will prompt you prior to something changing phases, as long as you have something to activate. But the reason I'm bringing this up is because a lot of people will turn the toggle to on and constantly have it on, meaning if they have something like Maxi, which is almost always activatable, it will constantly put their priority, and it will shift it to them, to the opponent. So if you see this, except over here on your opponent's side of the field, as a red line or red light up, that basically says, hey, they have a Maxi. If you haven't activated anything and their toggle's on, which it tends to be, I tend to just see that people have Maxi almost immediately because of that. Now, if it's something that activates specifically in the standby phase, then it is most assuredly going to be Dimension Shifter. If you know what this card does, it's activatable only in the standby phase if you control no cards in your graveyard. Basically, you discard it in order to banish all cards that are sent to the graveyard instead. So it's just very good at disrupting your opponent, especially if you don't care about banishing cards, like you're playing Grand Maju or something like Ritual Beasts or what have you. So if it is something that is specifically activatable in the standby phase, it's most likely going to be a Dimension Shifter. However, if it's activatable in the draw phase, it's most likely Maxi. There are a few other cards that could potentially be activatable in the draw phase, like Lancia as well, but most of the time it's just going to be Maxi. But as you can see, my opponent has searched a card off of Hysteric Sign, and I have the ability to chain a Duel and Lockbird to prevent them from activating anything. There isn't a whole lot that you can do to play around a Duel and Lockbird. Most of the time, Duel and Lockbird just comes down, and there's not a whole lot that you can do to play around it. You may be able to suss it out a little bit more quickly if you know that it's there, but there isn't a lot. So I'm just going to activate the Duel and Lockbird here to prevent them from searching. We'll allow them to continue comboing, and I'll show you if they end up getting 2/5 summons, which I sure hope that they do, but most likely they don't. Oh? No. Okay. Had they gotten to 5 summons, I could have showed you something else. Alright, so here we have a few new hand traps. We have Infinite Impermanence as well as Cyphering Gear Gamma here. But as you can see, we have something that is activatable, and this is a way to tell if it is either Imperm or Effect Veiler on your first turn. If it is still something that's activatable on the opponent's turn, you can't really tell because it's the opponent's turn. Most of the time they're going to have priority, but if it's in an instance like this, you can tell, hey, they didn't have something until I had a monster on field, meaning it is either imperm or effect veiler. Those are the only two options that it could be, so that is something to consider. If they have no cards on field, then it could be imperm. If they do have a card on field, then the only option that it could be is a effect veiler. So just things to consider and to play around. So there you go. That's one way to play around imperm and the like. Now, we're going to see if they actually... no, they didn't activate. All right, so I actually have Max C in my hand now, and as you can see, the opponent has drawn a card and priority has passed to me. It's lit up, meaning I have a chance to respond. Something I didn't really explain earlier, but yeah, priority just means it passes to me and I have a chance to respond with something. Since I have Max C's only condition is during either player's turn, so it's either player's turn, and then I just have to be able to send it to the graveyard, which I can currently do. So if I see this, I know that it's Max C 99.9% of the time, so that's an easy way to play around Max C. But let's give it back to my opponent, and as you can see, there is several opportunities for interaction here. So priority will continue to pass to me. It goes, you draw a card, then it's draw phase, then it's standby phase, then it's main phase, and then in main phase, they start with priority. So the opponent will always start with priority, or whoever's turn it is, and then priority will pass as soon as something happens. As soon as the opponent does something in main phase, priority can pass. Which is why a lot of times you'll see things like Schism, or, I mean, the myriad of other cards that are only activatable in the main phase. Nothing will happen at first, and you will be able to activate something, but then as soon as you activate something, or as soon as you play a card, they will respond with something like a Schism or what have you. So that's why that happens the way that it does. So as you can see, my opponent has flip summoned a monster, and here I get priority passed back to me. So we're going to let that go through. They're going to activate their cash to switch it to defense to search out a card. I'm really hoping that we can show off Nibiru here. And as you can see, a card was added, so it passed priority. Anytime something activates, it's going to pass priority back and forth, as long as this toggle is on. If it's not on, if it's set to auto, it will only activate when something is like normally activatable, so do keep that in mind. But they're going to normal summon the Scrap Goblin, and then they are going to do something. Oh, okay, Link Summon. And then Monster Reborn. I just get 5. Come on, 5 summons. This is 3. Okay, so here we have before end of main phase. Had they normal summoned 5 or summoned 5 times, Nibiru would also be activatable here. And the reason you toggle on is because it will give you this prompt. Now, if you don't have the toggle on, it won't give you the prompt for Nibiru, but I think Nibiru is pretty self-explanatory as to when you see it. If you've summoned 5 times and all of a sudden your opponent gets priority and they haven't had priority this entire time, they have a Nibiru in hand. Now, there are a lot of ways to play around stuff like that, but yeah, that's just one way. So, as you can see, we now have the option to do something at the end of the main phase. But we are just going to let them go to battle, and there's going to be a whole bunch of stuff that happens in battle phase. First of all, battle declaration, battle step, and then I can't really activate anything with the Max C during damage step and damage calculation, which are the other 2 steps in there, where you could potentially activate something. The only way that you can activate stuff during the damage step or damage calculation is with things that change the attack value of monsters. So things like Forbidden Chalice, Alistair the Invoker, Honest, etc. So there you go. If something is activatable during damage step or damage calculation, there's a high likelihood that it's something like a Forbidden Droplets, right? So there you go. And then before the end of the battle step, you will see a prompt, and then at the end of the battle phase, you will also see a prompt. So they're going to go to the main phase 2, go into Mrs. Radiant, which, again, we could have maxed and been drawing cards this entire time. Go to end phase, and then, again, during the end phase, it will prompt you as well. So hopefully that made sense as to how to kind of tell when things are activatable. Another thing, since I have Gamma in my hand here, I'm going to explain quickly how to tell if Gamma is the card that your opponent has. This one's a little bit less common, but it is definitely something to note. Basically, if you activate a spell card and they have nothing, they don't have Ash or something like that, fantastic. But if you activate a monster effect and all of a sudden that trigger goes on, the priority passes, it's a Gamma. Like 99% of the time. Unless it is something that activates on normal summon, it could also be something like an Imperm or an Effect Veiler. However, if your monster stays on the field, doesn't activate anything, and they get the priority passed to them, then it is an Imperm or an Effect Veiler. However, if priority doesn't pass until you activate an effect, then it is Gamma. Pretty self-explanatory. That's basically all you need to know in terms of how to play around hand traps. So let me quickly explain how to utilize hand traps. And let's hop over to Dueling Book to explain that. Alright, so now I want to talk about how to play hand traps. Now, again, this is more so specifically centered around Master Duel and knowing what to do in Master Duel. Even though we're not currently in Master Duel, it's just easier to show you here. So as you can see, I have a whole bunch of hand traps here for us, and most of it is going to be centered around just knowing what your opponent's deck does. Information is king in Yu-Gi-Oh! As it is in most situations. Now, there are some cards that are pretty simple and can just be fired off whenever, such as Dimension Shifter, Lancia, Droll and Lockbird, etc. Just basically fire them when you can, right? Lancia in particular is something where, because it only locks you out of banishing during the opponent's turn, it's still worth it to just like Lancia if you have it. Even if you don't think your opponent is playing something that could potentially banish, it's still potentially worth firing on the first turn. However, Lancia is one of those cards where you can fire it, but sometimes it's worth it to see just what your opponent's playing. If they're playing Tri-Brigade, you could just activate it before they're able to banish anything, prevent them from prevent them from banishing. If they're playing Eldritch, again, similarly, you can wait for them to show that they are playing said deck. So there are a lot of instances where you just want to hold it until you know for certain what they are playing. Dimension Shifter, on the other hand, is specifically when you have no cards in your graveyard. So this one can just be fired like immediately. Just fire it. Just fire it. It will hit just about every deck. Droll and Lockbird is another thing where it does have a very specific activation requirement, and it only gets better if you're able to activate it immediately. So just activate it, right? It doesn't actually cause cards to fizzle, if I'm not mistaken. So like if your opponent were to activate something that would like add another card to hand, and then you activate your Droll and Lockbird in response, I don't know if it will like fizzle or not. I'm not entirely certain, but realistically it's more worth it to just fire it off as soon as you can. As for the rest of these cards, it becomes a bit more problematic. With one exception, Maxi. Maxi is very simple. Just as soon as you see that your opponent has normal summoned something and could potentially go into a link 1, this is pretty simple. If there is something like a kit on your opponent's side of the field, if they have like kit on their side of the field, or if they have a... hold on, let's do this. The reason I say kit is because this card in particular can go into something like an Almirage, and with Almirage, that kind of gets their combo started, but that is a special summon, right? So if you see that they have the potential to go for a Link 1 off of a normal summon, drop your Maxi. If you see them activate an effect that special summons a card, activate your Maxi. If you see them trying to special summon another card off of something of like an inherent summon, like a Kaiju or Lyralisk, turquoise warp. No, not turquoise. It's not cobalt either. Sapphire. No, it's not sapphire. Whichever one the green one is. I can never remember the green one's name. Emerald. something or other. I don't remember. Anyway, if you see them special summon that, you can drop your Maxi. Maxi is pretty liberal. You could just like throw it out, and it could potentially just end your opponent's turn, which may be good enough. Moving on, we also have things like our Effect Veiler and Imperm. These two are a lot better because, unlike Ash Blossom, they're not chain blockable. However, if your opponent has a card that is untargetable, like for example the first Dark Lord, these don't really do anything. So you do want to kind of understand what your opponent could potentially go into. If they could potentially go into something like the first Dark Lord, or something that prevents them from being targeted, maybe dropping the Effect Veiler or the Infinite Impermanence to at least get some value out of them, maybe a little bit better. Now, Imperm is a little bit different than Effect Veiler, and it's mostly due to the fact that you can activate it on your turn to potentially deal with a problematic card, whereas Effect Veiler can only be done on your opponent's turn. You could actually just drop this at the beginning of your turn to negate a problematic monster or force out a negate from something like a Baron or a Borreload Savage, so that you could potentially play the rest of your hand unimpeded or with potentially less interruptions. As for Ash Blossom, this one in particular is very interesting. You kind of just have to know the deck in order to know what they are playing, as well as what cards to hit. Oftentimes, cards like Fractal generate too much advantage, and you more or less have to negate them. And a lot of times, they will have either a follow-up, or that will be the plan itself. You know, bait out an Ash Blossom with something like a Fractal, because it just generates too much advantage. If that's the case, that's the case, and they have the follow-up, and your Ash Blossom still did its job, but they just had the follow-up. But there are a lot of rogue decks that have just like one search. Again, for example, Dark Lords with Banishment of the Dark Lords. Sometimes that will just end their turn. With Despia, if you hit the Aluber, oftentimes that will just end their turn. So there are definitely different cards that you can hit depending on the deck. But this one in particular is very much so more based on actual knowledge of a deck. Yeah, you know, trying to Ash Blossom a Sword Soul player when they go Chi-Xiao into Moye, probably not worth it, but potentially Ash Blossoming something like a Tenyi Search or Tenyi Special Summon is way more worth it. If they banish a Vashutta, activating Ash Blossom there instead of trying to Ash Blossom the Chi-Xiao is definitely more worth it. Moving on, as for things that specifically interact with the graveyard, such as Skullmeister, Ghost Bell, or DD Crow, these are more particular. Ghost Bell is pretty much just fire it off if ever there is an opportunity. Like, for example, if, you know, they activate Contact, or Monster Reborn, or something like that, just Ghost Bell it. If they activate Called by the Grave, yes, you can actually negate the effect of Called by the Grave with Ghost Spell. If they activate Called by the Grave, maybe you want to Ghost Spell that, you know? If you really want your Ash Blossom to go through, or your Maxi, or something like that, you can Ghost Spell it. This one is more just like fire it. Just fire it. It's good most of the time. There are specific cards that you probably do want to hit. Like, for example, a DPE, you know? Activate it on a DPE so that it can't special summon itself back. I believe you can do that. I'm like 99% sure you can do that. So, yeah, there you go. Gamma is... yeah, let's just talk about Gamma. Gamma is something where it does require a little bit more setup. You can't just have it in your hand going second, or sorry, going first in your setup and then just be able to activate it. But notably, it can end turns depending on what your opponent does. For example, if they are playing a Drytron deck and they tribute off a card for their Drytron monster, Drytrons do need their effects to negate, or their effects to resolve. So if they don't tribute off specifically Ben 10, which, since the ban list has put Ben 10 to 1 in just about everywhere, it does make sense that they might only have the one. So they're probably not going to be tributing the Ben 10 to get additional searches. Gammaing that can literally end their turn. They might not have enough materials in their hand or what have you. They've already activated the effect of their monster in the grave, so they may just not have enough materials to continue. Also, it just really hinders them. But Gamma, because of the fact that it negates and destroys, unlike things like Ash Blossom, Effect Veiler, and Imperm, becomes incredibly more valuable if you hit something that has already been summoned. For example, if they normal summon out a Fractal and I Gamma it after they banish their material, that is very, very good. You always want to try and banish, or sorry, negate something that has already activated its cost. That's always the best option. Negate something after they activate their cost, because the cost oftentimes is pretty big. So there you go. Moving on, we have DD Crow. This one's pretty simple. If you see that there is something that can activate in the graveyard, just banish it. Or like that can be copied or brought back from the graveyard, just banish it. For example, if your opponent goes Fractal, send Kit, Kit, send Nerval, Nerval, search Karos, there's probably not a whole lot that you can do there. But if, for example, they go like Fractal, send Cobalt Sparrow, and then they special summon something out with the or they special summon out the yellow green bird. I cannot remember the Lyrilisk name. Anyway, the Lyrilisk that special summons itself for free, and then activates its effect. At that point, you probably want to banish the Cobalt Sparrow, because that's most likely what they are going to grab back. Again, it's more so just about knowing what your opponent's deck can potentially do. Yeah. Nibiru, there are a few things that are interesting about Nibiru. So let's actually just read this card, because this one is something that you actually just need to know. First of all, it's during the main phase. So make sure that your toggle is on and that you are staying in the main phase if you are at all wanting to use this. But if your opponent normal or special summons 5 or more monsters this turn, quick effect, you contribute as many face-up monsters on the field as possible. And if you do, special summon this card from your hand, then special summon a Primal Being token. To your opponent's side of the field, the token becomes the combined original attack and defense of the tributed monsters. So, quite a few things here to note. First of all, during the main phase. Second of all, it is normal or special summons, so any summons. Third of all, it is only going to tribute face-up monsters. Fourth of all, it tributes, so it doesn't destroy or anything like that. So tributing gets around most forms of protection, except for like literally Quintet Magician, I think is the only thing that can't be tributed, which is hilarious. Sorry. This is very important. You do have to tribute at least something. Tribute as many face-up monsters on the field as possible, because then you can special summon this card, and then you can special the token. So, you have to tribute, you have to successfully special summon the card, and then you can special summon the token. Which normally, if the first part doesn't go through and you don't special summon, you don't get the token, obviously, but you also don't tribute. This can come up if they have something like DPE, and they DPE pop their own DPE and like another card you control or something like that, or the only other monster on the field, and then Nibiru just fizzles and it doesn't do anything. So that is something to keep in mind. It can just fizzle, because it does say you have to tribute. And then the other thing that I do want to mention with this is that it does say original attack and defense. Now, because Nibiru is a quick effect, you can actually quick effect tag out specific cards. Like, for example, Witchcrafters and Ritual Beasts, two of the decks that I play, can actually have an interesting interaction with this. For example, if I activate my or the effect of something like a Witchcrafter Shmieta, and then I chain the Nibiru, what I can do is I can tag out my monster, tribute it, and then chain the Nibiru to special summon itself to tribute all of my opponent's monsters, and then I get to special summon as Chainlink 1 my monster to my side of the field. Same thing occurs with Ritual Beasts, where you tag out. There are no monsters, or however many monsters on your side of the field, and then before you can special summon your monsters, Nibiru tributes, specials the token, and then your monsters are special. So some interesting things to do with Nibiru. Just a very interesting card. As for things like a Ghost Ogre, one thing that I want to specifically point out is I think that this deck, or this card, will be more prominent when the Adventure Engine comes out, because it does hit the Adventure Engine in particular. But I do want to say that this only activates when a monster on the field activates its effect. So on basically any effect of a monster on the field, or specifically when a spell or trap that is already face up on the field activates its effect. So what this doesn't apply to is Imperial Order, Vanity's Emptiness, Tikaboo. Sorry, there can be only one. I had a match where I couldn't activate it against what is it? Anti-Spell Fragrance. A lot of those continuous traps don't actually activate in effect while already face up. So you can't actually Ghost Ogre it. That's why it's not being played, if you were wondering. So there you go. However, something like a continuous spell that activates its effect potentially multiple times, or more specifically a field spell, something like Magical Madness. Oh, sorry, that's a bad example. Something like the Sky Striker field spell or the Despia field spell. Both of those activate again after activating itself to just like summon it or use it. Those can both be hit by Ghost Ogre, or all be hit by Ghost Ogre. If something activates and searches at the same time, like, for example, Magical Meltdown, that one cannot be activated, right? Or Ghost Ogre. So, there you go. Token Collector is pretty simple. It's also pretty simple to play around. Basically, if you have a token on your side of the field, and all of a sudden your opponent's thing lights up, they're playing Token Collector, and you're about to get collected. This one's very simple. Basically, if you're playing against the Brave token, or you are playing against Sword Soul, just drop this guy. Just as soon as a token comes out, just eat it. This card's very crazy. It's also very specifically good. It only works if your opponent is playing tokens. If they are not playing tokens, it kind of doesn't do anything. So it's very hit or miss, and I expect to see it be played a bit more when the Adventure Engine comes out, because the Brave token will be everywhere, but until then, it's still very good against Sword Soul Tenyi, so if you're having trouble against that, consider teching in the Token Collector. As for things like the Honest or what have you, it's pretty simple. You can only activate it during the damage step, so there's only one time it's ever going to be activatable. You're not really going to be able to detect this. As for Orochi and other such more archetypal specific ones, these ones are pretty easy to tell if they have something that's activatable where normally a hand trap wouldn't be activatable. If you haven't seen a maxi, potentially it's that. Otherwise, it's probably something like Orochi, where it's just going to randomly special summon itself. There's not really a lot that you can do to play around this, other than know that it's a hard once per turn. But yeah, most of it's just like reading cards. All in all, though, yeah, there you go. Most of the knowledge when using hand traps is just knowing what the opponent's deck is trying to do and knowing the best way to stop that. For example, if your opponent is playing Sword Soul Tenyi and you see them go into a Moye and reveal a Longwon from their hand, potentially what you're going to want to do is Gamma them. Right? If you have that Gamma, just immediately Gamma them, because that could potentially turn off their entire deck. Or maybe you see that Longwon come down or be revealed, and you go, I'm going to wait to Gamma the Longwon, or what have you, right? You see the token come down from a from the Moye, and you go, oh, I'm just going to Token Collector that. Maybe think, oh, they have a Longwon. Maybe it's better if I Token Collector the Longwon token so that now they can't go into a 10, you know? All just kind of things of knowing your opponent's deck and what the deck does in order to know how best to hand trap them. There isn't anything specific. I might, you know, if you really want, I could potentially do videos explaining a few of the top decks in Master Duel and key points to hand trap them, but I don't think that would really be worth the time or effort. It's better just to know what the deck does itself and understand, like, oh yeah, Fractal is a good point to hit because it doesn't put too many cards into the graveyard, as well as stops their combo. Sure, if they have extra cards that they could potentially go into, like a Karos sending a kit, not a whole lot that you can do about that, but it is definitely better to Ash Blossom them on Fractal, etc., etc. Anyway, that's going to be it for this episode. I hope that you guys did indeed enjoy. One thing that I did want to quickly mention is that the reason oftentimes that I make the weird plays that I do in Master Duel is because I am aware of the toggle as well as what my opponent is potentially playing. If I see that priority pass to my opponent, I'm probably going to be playing around things like Ash Blossom or Max C. So if I make a weird play and I don't say why, that's probably why, and probably why at least some of my plays are a bit weirder. I'm just trying to play around Handtraps, which is definitely something that you should do as well. It definitely boosts your consistency with decks if you're aware of what your opponent has that they could potentially do. Anyway, that's going to be it. Hope that you guys did indeed enjoy it. If this did help you, leave a comment down below. Tell me that, hey, this was helpful. If it didn't help you, tell me that I'm stupid and that this was a terrible informative video. Terribly uninformative video. But if you want to support me through Patreon, you can check out the link down below, as well as the Discord is down there. You can join the Discord. A bunch of lovely people down there, not me. And yeah, that's going to be it for this. Hope that you guys did indeed enjoy. If you did, I like us very much, appreciate it. And just remember to always stay frosty. Bye-bye.